as late as the time of the Abraham Lincoln administration, uh, the United States was still a very young country. Less than 100 years had passed since the Revolution, and we really weren't in a position to be a major player on the world stage. We're separated by vast oceans from all the older, greater powers in the world, nations with centuries and millennia of history and complex relationships, and we're really not in a position to be taken seriously as part of the global community. In 1865, the U.S. State Department, which is the department that is responsible for international relations, had barely 60 employees and and no ambassadors. In fact, there's only 24 American foreign ministers in just a few select countries, and even these at the time had been appointed not because of any great skill or qualification, because they had bribed their way into office. And we also don't have a particularly strong military, especially not a strong navy. If you want to play the international relations game, you've got to have some muscle to back it up. And for pretty obvious reasons, our military resources are pretty depleted after the Civil War. So we're just not in a position to be a big global power at this time. Although even in the Lincoln years and the Reconstruction years, there are a few voices who are interested in expanding American overseas influence, and a few baby steps are taken toward the United States becoming an imperial power. Secretary of State William Seward, who served from 1861 to 1869, so throughout the Lincoln and Johnson presidencies, he established a treaty with Nicaragua that would eventually, not in his lifetime and not for decades, but would eventually lead to the construction of a canal across Central America that we'll talk about a little later and will be really important. And he also pushed through annexing a set of islands, the Midway Islands in the Pacific Ocean, so that we could have a base of operations for trade, because we're in the second half of the 1800s, we're getting a growing understanding that the biggest potential customer for American-made goods is across the Pacific Ocean, in China and throughout Asia. So Midway Islands required a treaty with Nicaragua. He's got bigger imperial dreams, rather unrealistic. Seward wants to take British Columbia from Canada. He wants the Hawaiian Islands. He wants at least parts of the Dominican Republic, Cuba, other territories. In 1867, he speaks in Boston, and this sounds kind of super villainy. This sounds more like Thanos of Titan than an American secretary of an American cabinet secretary, but he professes intention to give the United States control of the world. Control of the world. He kind of said the quiet part out loud, but because of American military weakness and the distance from the established powers, other than these baby steps, he's not in any position to actually do that. He does purchase Alaska from Russia for $7.2 million in 1867, and he's almost universally mocked for this, because Alaska ain't exactly Tahiti. It's called Seward's Folly or Seward's Icebox. What the heck do we need with all this frozen tundra? Until we discover that there are rich mineral resources and gold in them there hills, and now there is what we call the Klondike gold rush into Alaska, and it turns out it turns out that economically, Seward's acquisition of Alaska wasn't nearly as wrong-headed as was thought. Of course, the indigenous people, the indigenous environment, and the longer-standing Russian culture of the longer-standing Russian settlers tend to suffer, as always seems to happen. Things are changing, though, in the United States over this time period. We're covering the same time period over and over and over again from different aspects. So at this point, we know that industrialization causes American wealth to skyrocket. We're producing all these new goods. At least the business owners are getting super wealthy. But of course, new goods need more customers, and so there's a growing desire for a more expansionist foreign policy, with the understanding that by forging new and stronger ties overseas, the United States could gain access to international markets for export, as well as better deals on the raw materials that we need to use to build all this material. American exports to other nations skyrocketed in the years following the Civil War, from $234 million in 1865 to $605 million in 1875. So that is a 10-year more than doubling of American exports. By 1898, we're exporting $1.3 billion annually, and imports are following a same pattern of expansion. So our interest in what's going on overseas is becoming far from just an academic interest in wonder what's over there, to hey, our economic well-being is becoming more and more tied to what's going on in other countries. And yet we have no control over what's going on in other countries. Therefore, we have no control over the continued health of our rapidly expanding economy. And that, from the perspective of many U.S. Americans at the time, is not okay. There are other reasons to be interested in what's going on overseas. Both religious leaders and the progressive reformers are growing in an interest in what's going on over there. Many progressive reformers see the rest of the world as mission territory for the spread of democracy and for the spread of the type of social justice reforms that are often associated with progressivism, while meanwhile, the United States of America is a secular nation, which means it intentionally has no official religion, and religious bodies cannot dictate to the state. But as far as population, it's always had a Christian majority, and in the 1800s it's specifically a Protestant Christian majority, a non-Catholic Christian majority, although the Catholic population is growing with immigration that is beginning. And Christianity has always been a universalizing religion, a religion that believes that it's not intended just for a single nation, a single people, but that its mission is to expand. There's a line placed on the lips of Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew in the New Testament, known as the Great Commission. Go ye therefore into all the world and proclaim the gospel to every nation, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Christians have long felt this drive to spread Christianity. And so Christian missionaries see, especially Asia, of course Europe has been Christian much longer than the United States, but Asia has has never been a majority Christian place, and in the 1800s, the Christian population of most of Asia is very small. So there's a missionary drive from American Christians to go overseas and make converts. And despite the fact that the United States of America officially, not speaking demographically by population, but officially as far as the governing philosophy and the actual law and the Constitution, is not a Christian nation, but is a nation without an official religious affiliation. Many people conflate the Christian faith held by the majority of Americans with the official position of America, and this happens too in this period. And so people begin to treat the expansion of American influence with the same devotion that people treat their religious faith, and consider expanding American interests to be greatly overlapping with, if not identical with, expanding Christian faith. Not the constitutionalist idea of all time, but, what are you going to do? Oh, hey, and guess what? Remember our running theme? That life is messy and people are always complicated. So some, not all, but some of the progressive reformers who are seeking real social justice change are motivated for that noble work by less than noble philosophy. Many of them are influenced by the recent scholarship on race-based intelligence, pseudo-scholarship we should say, and embrace the implication of social Darwinist theory, such that many of them believe that the Anglo-Saxon race is mentally superior to others and owed the presumed less evolved populations their stewardship, their care, their benefit. So this is a racism that drives not hatred, but paternalism, viewing pater is the Latin for father. So paternalism is viewing ourselves as the parent of the childlike, less developed, less capable other races of the world. Rudyard Kipling calls this the white man's burden. So it's often care and outreach, and sometimes real positive change, driven by really gross and negative philosophy. In the section 22.1 of the OpenStax text, remember what we call these? Remember what we call these inserts? We call them things. There is a really good thing spotlighting Lottie Moon, a Southern Baptist missionary, an American Southern Baptist missionary to China. I urge you to read her story. So, the Turner thesis that the United States needs to expand in order to maintain in order that we may maintain our identity, and the growing reality that our thriving economy is deeply connected to what's going on in other parts of the world over which we have no control. These notions are greatly expanding throughout the American people, and now the United States is turning away from a policy of isolationism. Y'all mind y'all own business and we'll mind our own business, to an explicitly expansionist position. Turner, who we've already met, Theodore Roosevelt, who we will say a lot more about, although, because we cover the same time over and over again, I guess you already know he's going to be president, but this time he's Assistant Secretary of the Navy. and naval strategist Alfred Thayer Mahan were some of the instrumental figures in turning this growing sense that we need to expand into a reality. You can read about that in section 22.1 of the OpenStax textbook. Mahan takes a look at the sad state of the U.S. Navy, and so his goal is to build a much, much stronger Navy, and also to acquire, through lease, through treaty negotiation, or through other means, naval bases elsewhere in the world, so that we're far away from everything, so that we don't have to travel all the way across the ocean to ensure American interests are met. Mahan also urges the construction of a canal across the Isthmus of Central America. This is the spot, and later on when it actually happens, we'll look at it on a map, but this is the narrowest part of our American hemisphere, and if we could cut across that with a canal, it would greatly decrease. It would eliminate the need to have to sail all the way down to Tierra del Fuego, all the way down to the southernmost tip of South America and back up around to travel. So increase the Navy, build naval bases on other people's land. All your bases belong to us, and cut across Central America. And he's very successful. By the start of the 20th century, the United States, from being a piddly podunk nobody, ranks among the top 5 naval powers globally. Here's a look at some of the territory that we acquired between 1865 and 1890. We've talked about Alaska. We've talked about the Midway Islands. We're going to talk about some of these others. Some of them will be very familiar places to many of my students. We'll come back to Hawaii in a second. We had strategic interests in the Samoan Islands of the South Pacific. This is right here. Most notably, access to the naval refueling station at Pago Pago, where American merchant vessels, as well as naval ships, could take on food, fuel, and supplies. You see that? So, let's take Samoa just as a case study. We're interested in doing business with Asia, but we're here. We need Asia to be secure in the sense that nobody's messing with our interests in the Asian market. So having bases in all these places gives us a major leg up in that goal. It's for the same reason that we acquire Hawaii, and the story of the acquisition of Hawaii is not an especially happy story, and to hear that story, we'll turn to the next video.